Not necessarily sit down, but take a seat. Really? Good start. Okay. Now that I've told everyone to take a seat, now I'm going to ask everyone to stand up. And Ruth is going to lead us in an invocation this evening.
Father, thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for the freedoms that we have and all the things that we take for granted that are definitely gifts from you. And we ask you to bless Dan as we benefit from his endless hours of study, and remind us of the wisdom, that verse that Solomon gave us. Better is the harsh words of a wise man than the song of a fool. So we want to be wise even though it's harder. So we ask for your strength, for your guidance, and for your wisdom. So all these things we ask in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
And please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You can take a seat. I was going to start passing the bucket around. And this is, just as a reminder, this is a free event, a free meeting. But we do have expenses, so if you can spare a couple dollars, we certainly appreciate it. There was an atheist taking a flight, he got on the airplane, and when he went to take his seat, he saw that he was sitting next to a rather old, weathered cowboy. And so he thinks, this might be a good time to stir some things up. So he says to the cowboy, who actually wanted to it was a late flight, he had a long day, really wanted to get some sleep. But he says to the cowboy, hey, you know what? It would make the trip go a lot faster if we had a conversation. And the cowboy said, well, what do you want to talk about? And he said, well, why don't we talk about how there's no God, no heaven, no hell, no life after death? And the cowboy said, well, that's fine, but can you answer one question for me? And he said, well, what is that? And he said, can you tell me why, a deer, a cow, and a horse all eat the same thing. They all eat grass. But a deer produces little pellets, whereas a cow produces a flat patty, and a horse clumps. And the atheist thought about that and said, I don't know. I don't know the reason. And the cowboy responded with, well, how do you expect us to have a conversation about God and heaven and hell and life after death when I already know you don't know crap?
I like that one. Praise the Lord.
Okay, excuse me a second. I need to bring up some notes. We're going to jump right into our main speaker for tonight, Dan Reginald. I'm sure a lot of you have already seen him before. He's spoken at this meeting several times. It's been a while, but he's spoken several times at this meeting. You probably have heard him if you listen to Brian Thomas in the morning, you probably have heard him there. Just got a quick clip about him. Dan is a lover of liberty and enjoys speaking at empowered youth classes and subjects that he's passionate about. You may not have any interest in these, but his interest is in things like Milton Friedman, Saul Alinsky, net neutrality, D-Day, the deficit, how to destroy America in 3 easy steps, public education, Winston Churchill, President Theodore Roosevelt, Thomas Sowell, and those are at the Empower You classes. He's the founder and chairman of Frame USA, which is a made-in-America picture frame manufacturing company based in Springdale. And we'll give you Dan Reginald.
Thank you. So, thanks for the introduction. And will you come and pray at all our classes, please? That is the best thing. Could we give Ruth a round of applause?
Amen.
And to the great leaders, we've got Jan I met Jean, I met, who else did I meet? I met Eric, Aaron helped me. Give them a round of applause too. Thank you so much. So I'm going to take a shot in the dark here. Do we have any vets here tonight? Okay, I think 4. So last night, I hope some of you had a chance to watch some of our classes. I run EmpowerYouAmerica.org, which is a free university, and it's got one purpose, and that is to try to help people become more empowered in their lives. We teach all sorts of classes about all sorts of different things. It's not all heavy-duty politics. We do fun stuff. We do education, history, things like that. Last night we did a class on D-Day, the 79th anniversary. And it was so much fun. We talked about it for 2 hours. We went through everything that happened. It's one of the most amazing stories ever. If you're interested, the video is on the website, EmpowerYouAmerica.org. But what we did for the event was we created a plaque for veterans. And we gave out, I think we had 13 veterans there last night. And this is what the plaque says. It says, some people live an entire lifetime and wonder if they have ever made a difference. In the world, a veteran doesn't have that problem. And that's a quote from Ronald Reagan. Let's give a congrats. So, who are the vets again? If you raise your hand. Okay, let's start back here. And your name, sir?
Bob Flagg.
Bob Flagg, and what branch were you in?
United States Navy.
Let's give Bob a round of applause. We've got Donald. Donald, what branch were you in?
U.S. Air Force.
U.S. Air Force, what years?
66 to 70.
Let's give Donald a round of applause. It's Terry, right?
Yeah.
And what branch were you in?
Marines.
What years?
73 to 77.
Let's give Terry a round of applause. And then down front here. And your name, sir?
Bob Handoff.
Bob, and what branch were you in?
U.S. Army.
U.S. Army, what years?
69 to 71.
Thank you for your service, sir. Let me grab one more. I think just one more. And your name again, sir, is? And I'm sorry. Yeah, you can state.
No, I'm okay.
Oh, you got your Buddha. And your name again was?
But thank you. I was in Marine Corps, 72 to 76.
Thank you for your service, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. One more. I'm sorry, I missed somebody. I apologize. And, oh, sir. And your name is?
It's Brett,
And Brett, what service were you in?
U.S. Air Force.
In what year?
1982 to 1987.
Thank you for your service, sir. So we always do a giveaway at Empower You, and tonight what we're going to do is we're going to give away a copy of the book, which was part of what I used for this topic we're going to talk about tonight, Thomas Sowell. If any of you watch, there's a show on Fox News, I think at 3 o'clock on Saturday, called The Wall Street Report or something like that. There's a guy in there named Jason L. Riley, who is really good. This is his book on Thomas Sowell, who we're going to talk about tonight. So get your tickets out. There will be one lucky winner. Last 3 numbers, 537. 537. 537. Who's got it? Uh-oh.
Hang on.
The winner is... Kathy, congratulations. So, hopefully all my audio stuff will work tonight and we'll go easy. So Eric said I've been here a few times, and I have. I think this is my 4th time here. And the other 4 times I was here, the other 3 times I was here, this is the 4th, I was trying to sell something, a political thing. I came to talk about a balanced budget amendment one time. I came to talk about, 2 other things. I can't really remember exactly what it was, but what I'm not here to do tonight is to sell you anything. I'm not trying to get you to vote for anything. What I want you to try to do, like I talked to this gentleman right here who used to run the education department in Kentucky, I want you to try to open your mind up to tonight's presentation, because Thomas Sowell is going to challenge you on several topics that I know you'll all be interested in. So we'll just get into it and see how it goes. Text for tonight is the book that Kathy won called Maverick, along with several other things I used. The thesis for tonight is Thomas Sowell's evidence, the things I'm going to talk to you about tonight, good enough? Is it accurate? And that's where we're going to start. So probably a lot of you don't know a lot about Thomas Sowell. He's going to be somebody I think you're going to be interested in learning more about. He grew up in Harlem. Thank you. I think I forgot to thank Aaron too for all his help setting up. Thanks, Aaron. Tried out for the Brooklyn Dodgers. Dropped out of high school to join the Marine Corps. He was in the Korean War, received an undergraduate degree from Harvard, a master's from Columbia, doctorate from the University of Chicago. Studied and taught at Douglas, Howard, Cornell, Brandeis, UCLA, and Amherst. This is a well-educated man. So this is just a short video about what life was like for him growing up.
Thomas Sowell was born in Gastonia, North Carolina on June 30th, 1930. The Great Depression was just getting underway. And like many blacks in the South at the time, his family had no electricity, no central heating, and no hot running water. Sowell's father died before Tom was born. And his mother, a maid, died in childbirth just a few years later.
He was adopted by his great aunt and raised by her and her 2 daughters. So he was raised by 3 women.
My whole career would not have been possible without the particular family in which I was raised, which was not composed of educated people. I mean, nobody in that family had ever graduated from high school, and most did not graduate from grade school. But they were interested in education, and they were interested in me.
So, one of the things Thomas Sowell talks about, when we're going to talk a little bit about education tonight, is just how important it is, how important reading is. And so I'm going to show you a quick clip about what he says about reading.
In Harlem, there was a kid named Eddie that members of the family had run into before I ever arrived in North Carolina. He came from a highly educated family, and they immediately saw the implications if they could get him to mentor me.
Eddie brought Tom here to the Harlem Public Library, taught him how to find books that interested him, taught him how to check them out.
And I saw all these books, and I had no idea why we were there, but I don't have even money to buy one book. And so, what am I going to do with all these, hundreds of books up on the shelf?
Crossing the threshold to this new world was the first step on a path young Tommy might not otherwise have taken.
And he very patiently walked me through the whole thing. And again, I was very reluctant to take out a library card because I didn't know what all this is about. But he would talk me into it. Then I borrowed a couple of books. And really, had I not encountered him, the entire rest of the story could not have been the way it was. I mean, at some point I would learn what a public library was, but by that point, it would be too late. When you start getting the habit of reading when you're 8 years old, that's a different ballgame than if you have to wait till you're a teenager. It's too late now.
When you start reading at the age of 8 years old, it's a whole different ballgame. So To understand Thomas Sowell, let's talk about his purpose. From an early age, I've been concerned with trying to understand the social problems that abound in any society. I want to share my understanding of these problems with others. The only thing that saved me was I always thought that facts mattered. And remember that, facts matter, because that's kind of his mantra that he's known for. So Thomas Sowell is a contrarian. That means he's probably a lot like you. A contrarian is a person who opposes or rejects popular opinion that goes with common practice. A lot of Sowell's purpose in his work was gained through his hobby of photography.
Photography did have connections to his vision of reality. Tom once commented to me that to be a photographer, you have to master trade-offs. All of the little adjustments that you fiddle with in the camera never involve making everything better or everything worse. It's a matter of trading one thing off for another. If you close down the diaphragm, then you get lots and lots of stuff in focus near to far. On the other hand, you're cutting down the amount of light. And a theme in Tom's work on society is that all policies involve trade-offs, and Tom often loses patience at people with sweeping visions. Here's how we can improve society. Here's a solution to a problem. And Tom points out in his political writings, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. Just like photography.
Kind of an interesting way to think about things, that all policy, all politics, all social issues, they involve trade-offs. And so let's talk a little bit about Sowell and how he came up and what he did. He arrived at the University of Chicago in the fall of 1959 to begin his PhD. He was 29. Most people think that Thomas Sowell went there to study under the great Milton Friedman, but he really went there to study under another economist that I really never have heard his name from before, and that's a guy by the name of George Stigler. Sowell was turned off by Harvard and the Ivy Leagues because they tried to assimilate him. But the admission policies at University of Chicago were very demanding. Chicago had a reputation for being conservative, and get this, Thomas Sowell was strong and left-wing, and he was under the influence of Karl Marx. I don't know how many of you know about the University of Chicago and how hard it is to get in, but that was really something that he ever got to the University of Chicago, being under Marx, who was totally opposite at that time of Milton Friedman and George Stigler. I'm hitting the wrong button, sorry. So I don't want you to be too disappointed tonight. This isn't going to be kind of a straight economics talk. I'm not going to try to get in the weeds about economics. But Sowell is more of a sociologist than he is an economist. He's an introvert. You'll see that if you go to YouTube, if you look at him online, if you like what you see tonight, there's probably 40 clips of him that he's done in the last 40 years, and they're all the same clips. He didn't really like to get out much. What he liked to do was take pictures and interpret society and what could be tweaked to improve things. He was always looking at cultures in terms of how different groups fare. His goal wasn't necessarily to offer solutions. He really didn't like to offer solutions. He didn't see that as role. He felt like it was his role to get the issues out on the table and let other people solve problems. The biggest problem Thomas Sowell had was that the media wouldn't report on him. They didn't report on him. The New York Times stopped reporting on anything that he did in 1980. And he couldn't get his ideas out there because, just like you're finding today, nobody would report on him. They couldn't ever say he was wrong, but they wouldn't report his work. Sowell was interested in Karl Marx. In his late teens, Sowell became interested in Marx after purchasing a second set of encyclopedias. His senior thesis at Harvard was on Karl Marx. He wanted to learn about those cruel capitalists, the oppressed masses. He identified as a Marxist. He worked at many low-level jobs kind of starting out. He wrote that Marx took the complexity out of the real world and made all the parts fall into place. Here's what Thomas Sowell says about Marxism.
I went to the University of Chicago as a Marxist. After a year of studying under Milton Friedman, I was still a Marxist. But one summer of working in the government was enough to start turning around.
Really, what happened to you there?
Well, nothing happened to me, but that I realized that the government was nowhere close to being capable of doing what people on the left wanted the government to do. And that in fact, we'd be lucky if they didn't make things worse. For example, I was in the Labor Department, and they administered the minimum wage law. To me, the question was, did minimum wage law make poor people better off or worse off? That was not the question for them. The minimum wage law provided 1/3 of their total budget. And they weren't going to look at this other way. And as I tried to get into the question, does this cause unemployment and stuff like that, there was no enthusiasm whatsoever.
So Sowell went to the University of Chicago School of Economics. In the 60s, the University of Chicago became known as a ferociously opposed to Keynesian economics. Of course, Keynesian economics is now associated with Joe Biden economics. You spend as much money as you can, you try to prime the pump, you try to get people to spend it, and you hope you don't have inflation. Well, we know how that went, right? What the University of Chicago believed was in monetary supply, and like I told you, this isn't going to be an economics class. But the school became mostly associated with Milton Friedman and George Stigler, two of the most influential economists in the second half of the 20th century. Friedman rejected the idea that inflationary government policies were the best way to respond to economic downturns. And Friedman, as some of you kind of are in my age range, you probably remember the days when he had his TV show called Free to Choose on, and it was just incredibly good. And he had so many interesting novel ideas. He also had this book called Capitalism and Freedom. So Stigler and Friedman got together. They nominated this Marxist Thomas Sowell to receive a fellowship at the University of Chicago. In doing so, Milton Friedman said, Thomas Sowell's a socialist, but he's too smart. He won't remain that way for long. Friedman took him under his arms and almost treated him like a protege, taught him everything that he would get to know. And Friedman was a terribly hard professor. In his class on economics, Sowell's first year, 8 out of 17 passed. Sowell got a B. No one received an A. Friedman forced you to confront your own sloppy thinking, said Thomas Sowell. There's nothing more important as a teacher. Friedman made efforts to change Sowell's view on Marxism. As a teacher, Sowell would adopt some of the same approaches as Friedman. Sowell said, my teaching was directed towards getting students to think. Sowell was known for demanding very high standards from his students. George Stigler was a big influence, probably a bigger influence than Friedman. Stigler influenced economics. He was a Nobel Prize winner. He was most known for his price theory, and he taught Sowell to look, my pointer doesn't work, sorry. He taught Sowell to, more important than anything, look at the data, look at the evidence. That will tell you what you need to do. Sowell also became a fan of William F. Buckley. He appeared on William F. Buckley's show Firing Line. How many of you saw that? Have seen that show at some point in time? It was a great show. Buckley was an intellectual. He had his popular show. He taught Thomas Sowell the importance of evidence and the need to test evidence. Show me the evidence, Sowell said, and that became his slogan that he was most known for. Sowell's views started to change. In 1960, he took a position at the U.S. Department of Labor in Washington, D.C. He was asked to look at minimum wage issues. Sowell said, the experience of seeing government at work from the inside made me rethink the notion of government. Here's more about what Thomas Sowell found about the minimum wage.
One of my biggest concerns was about minimum wages. At first I thought this is good because all these people are poor and they'll get a little higher income, and so that would be helpful. And then as I studied economics, I began to say, well, there's a downside. They may lose their jobs completely, so that is that. When I was at the Labor Department, I tried to talk about that to them, and eventually I came up with some test of it. When I came up with how we might test this, I was waiting to hear congratulations to see that I had this. And I could see these people were stunned. They said, oh, this idiot has stumbled on something that would ruin us all. And I realized the U.S. Department of Labor had its own agenda and interests. And that did not necessarily mean that whether the poor people lost their jobs from minimum wage or got higher pay was their highest priority.
Tom Sowell looked at the data, and the data found that minimum wage hikes caused people who are unskilled to lose jobs. He found out that people in the government didn't give a rip whether or not it worked or didn't work. They were simply implementing the policy. And that's what shocked him and caused him to begin to rethink lots of his assumptions. So it wasn't academia that caused him to become more conservative. It was real life working for the government.
Do you think maybe we could put everybody to work for the government a little bit? That might maybe help. Gosh, I don't want it to be me. So Sowell and the Civil Rights Movement. During the height of the Civil Rights Movement, Sowell was optimistic about the Civil Rights Movement. He was born in an extremely poor family. His family was undereducated. He'd been turned away from restaurants and housing because of his skin color. Rather than stand at a restaurant as a black person, he said he'd rather subject himself to hunger. Sowell wrote, "The more I follow the integration struggles of the South, the more I'm inclined to be skeptical as to the actual fruit of it." Sowell said, "Black leaders still often seem far more interested in seeking slavery reparations." That's a word you're surely hearing a lot about. I did a class at Empower You, I think 2.5 years ago, when I talked about Rand Paul's penny plan, and I listed 7 wild government programs that sometime might come to fruition, and reparations was, I think, number 3. You hear it everywhere. You hear it about right now in the city of Cincinnati. You also hear about universal basic income in the city of Cincinnati, which was another one of the 7 things we talked about. But Sowell's big question was not whether government mandated racial segregation should end, but whether that by itself would be enough. Would it be enough by itself to solve inequalities? Here Sowell says a few words about reparations.
Most people do not recognize the fact that if you go back into the 20s, you find that married couple families were much more prevalent among blacks then than today. As late as 1930, blacks had lower unemployment rates than whites. So all these things that we complain about and attribute to the era of slavery, those things should have been worse in the past than in the present. But in fact, they're worse in the present than in the past. And I think if you want to look for a turning point, it would be since the 1960s.
And what happened in the 1960s?
You began to have not only the welfare state, you began to have the mindset that goes with the welfare state, so that there was no stigma any longer attached, for example, to being on relief or welfare.
You know, I rewatched these clips kind of getting ready for my talk tonight. It's something I didn't even really think about, that when I was a kid, you didn't hear people talk, they wouldn't talk about being on welfare. It was really kind of a thing that people weren't proud of. And most of the people that were on welfare would try so hard to get a job. And it's so hard to see how far we've gotten away from that. And I know there's this nothing burger debt ceiling negotiation, but I think that's something that you should keep in mind. Sowell, in the 60s, civil rights organizations were helpful, he said, but back then, the other thing I learned that was so interesting to me in studying Thomas Sowell was that how great the African American population was doing in the 20s to the 60s. There's a straight line of how they had eradicated poverty. They had done better than anything, and it was 1960 when the Great Deal, when Lyndon Johnson's Great Society came into effect. It ruined all the progress that had been made. It was really, really interesting to read. But back in the 60s, civil rights leaders would say to their race, "Don't appear on the street in old ragged clothes." Did your mom or your dad ever say that to you? Don't loaf, get a job, keep your children in school. Black poverty fell faster in the 60s than in the subsequent decades. But soon the push among blacks for equal treatment gave way to demands for quotas, set-asides, and other special treatments. In 1964, Sowell wrote, "To me, the psychology of the Negro is the biggest single obstacle to racial progress." Read those words. This is a guy that grew up in total poverty. The current pleas for special treatment are a symptom of the attitude that needs changing, and such a treatment would be a big obstacle to necessary change. Racial preferences for blacks are not a substitute for the development of skills and attitude. that are conducive to upward mobility. He went on to say, how can anyone seriously expect for blacks to develop initiative, respect for work, and responsibility when they receive preference and special privileges? This is one place where he differed with his mentor, Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman's approach in the book Free to Choose was something called the negative income tax. Friedman said, we're not going to send you a debit card. What we're going to do is just put all the welfare programs together, and we're just going to plain send you a check every month. That was Friedman's approach. Friedman was Thomas Sowell even though this guy was his mentor, totally opposed that. And he said, as soon as you give out handouts, you take away the incentive to do great things. Here, Sowell talks about the welfare state and universal basic income.
Yeah, what would you say to the people? I hear a growing movement of people saying, well, this is why we need a universal basic income, because technology is going to force so many people out of the workplace.
Oh, that argument has been made for centuries. It's been proven wrong for centuries. I would ask the question, what has happened? We've moved in that direction already. We have lots of people who can live off the welfare state and not have to be productive. And how are they better people as a result of that? I saw some time back, and I haven't followed this, that young people, the suicide rates among young people were among the negative consequences of the 1960s. You've taken all meaning out of people's lives. And so they find all kinds of crazy things to do, drugs, whatever. And then again, it's not huge in the United States. You find this in Britain, other countries. And so again, people who say this almost never look at any facts about what's happened as we expanded the welfare state, that people behave better. No.
Why is nobody talking this way in our country? What is the level of just total ignorance and stupidity that causes people not to look at the real situation? Listen to that. You've taken all the meaning out of people's lives. How do you feel about that? Here Sowell talks about affordable housing.
One of the big forces out here talks about affordable housing. And they're appointing blue ribbon committees to look into why there's no affordable housing. And I think that's like appointing a blue ribbon committee to explain why the ground is wet after a rain. I mean, it's very simple. If you prevent people from building housing and the population is growing, you're going to have a housing shortage, and you won't have affordable housing. It's really, economics 1 during the first 2 weeks.
So you heard what Thomas Sowell said. Let them build it. Let them build the houses. They'll build them, right? So we've got the city of Cincinnati now, through a quasi-government agency that nobody knows anything about. They make this decision to get in the real estate market to improve affordable housing, and they spend $14.5 million. They go float a bond with no voters voting on it, and they go out and they buy 194 residential houses. They plan on spending $25,000 a house to improve it for affordable housing. They don't look at any of the houses they're buying. They get in there, they find that they cost $67,000 a piece to renovate. And what purpose in the world could government have to get in any kind of real estate? How could it ever happen? In the early 80s, Sowell decided to push back on the NAACP. Sorry about the wording here. This is a direct quote. I think the NAACP are classic house niggers, Sowell told the Washington Post. Their support comes from the white liberals in the press and their philanthropy, and they are constantly taking positions the very opposite of the black community. What is tragic is the media has bought their position. Ronald Reagan, you can imagine, Reagan had the quote that I handed out on some of the plaques. You can imagine Reagan listening to Thomas Sowell would very much like what he heard. And he tried to hire Sowell to run the Department of Education. And Sowell said, Sowell, wanted to take pictures, study issues, study problems. He didn't want to go to work in a big building in Washington, D.C. And he said, I can get more done contributing, staying out of government, and he did. So the media and the others started to talk about Sowell as a sellout. You can picture the liberal media. This guy's a sellout. Nothing he's saying could possibly be true about education, about affordable housing, about anything. And here's what Sowell talks about when people talked about him selling out.
How do the anointed refer to people they don't agree with?
All sorts of ways, but I think the main thing is they believe that you're not really in error but in sin. In other words, they can't believe that you're just mistaken. You must have sold out. You must have been warped about you.
Do people think you sold out because you're conservative?
Oh, some do. Some do. I'm always fascinated with that phrase. First time I heard it was at Cornell University, and I attacked the president of Cornell University on the front page of the New York Times. I wanted, now, if I'm selling out, who am I selling out to? If I'm attacking the president of Cornell University, what brownie points will I get for that as an assistant professor on a 3-year contract?
Yeah, that's not good. Yeah.
No. And the other thing that always gets me is that the people who are supposed to have sold out typically have less money than the ones who are making the accusation. Years ago,
That's true.
I remember some student wrote to me and I said, what you need to do is make a list of all the blacks from your campus you think have sold out. And then make a list of those you think you have stood up for the right thing, you see. And then alongside each name, put down the name and model of car that they drive. And then see if you want to reconsider what you just said.
And we know who that was interviewing him, right? Roger Ailes, the founder of Fox News. People began to start referring to Sowell as a modern Frederick Douglass. This is a quote from Frederick Douglass. I love this quote. I have but one answer from the beginning. Do nothing with us. If the apples will not remain on the tree of their own strength, let them fall. And if the Negro cannot stand on his own legs, let them fall. All I ask is give them a chance to stand on their own legs. I'm drawing a blank on the exact time period. I guess it would have been, that's correct, around 1865. Where did we lose the wisdom of Frederick Douglass? So Sowell's writing on race was only 2/3 of his writing were on other subjects. I have an autistic grandson who's a late talker. Thomas Sowell had a child who didn't talk till he was 4 years old. So he went out and wrote a book on late talking children. He talked about how to choose a college. He talked about the housing boom, the subprime mortgage crisis. His best-selling economics book is still used today. He believed that the basic assumptions behind many policies aimed at minorities needed to be better scrutinized, and felt that there were too few public intellectuals speaking out about it. Colleagues said to Sowell, hey, listen, man, you better stop writing about race and you better return to your stories about economics. Sowell said, unfortunately, there are very few people who take positions similar to mine in 1990, and if the viewpoint is to be heard, I'm going to have to be the one that gets it out there. Here is a clip of Thomas Sowell talking to one of my favorite all-time people, Walter Williams.
Not a single country in the world where the policies that are being advocated for blacks in the United States have lifted any people out of poverty. I've seen many examples around the world, people who began in poverty and ended in affluence. Not one of them has followed any pattern at all like what is being advocated for blacks in the United States. Many groups have remained in poverty for a very long time, trying to follow those patterns.
At one time, black Americans did not have the constitutional guarantees as everybody else. Now we do. But because the civil rights struggle is over and won, and we're not facing the kind of gross racial discrimination of the past, does not mean that they're not major problems. I'm for sure that Tom would say that the 75% rate of illegitimacy among blacks is a devastating problem, but it's not a racial problem. It's not a legacy of slavery. The crime that I believe Tom would say as well, that the crime we see in many black communities is a devastating problem, but it has nothing to do with racial discrimination.
If you have always believed that everyone should play by the same rules and be judged by the same standards, that would have gotten you labeled a radical 50 years ago, a liberal 25 years ago, and a racist today.
Isn't that the truth? Affirmative action, diversity. Affirmative action robs black students who have done well from receiving real credit and the boosting confidence that they deserve. Race-based admissions also lead to a demand for black studies. It's so far easier for universities to establish African American studies departments than to actually place blacks in traditional academic disciples. Has my friend Vivek Ramaswamy made its way down to you in northern Kentucky yet?
He was here, Kelly Craft, a couple of weeks ago.
He was where?
He was here with Kelly Craft a couple of weeks ago.
At this meeting?
No, he was just in northern Kentucky.
So I urge you to get engaged with him. I've known him since he was a little kid. He played tennis with my daughters, and that's one of the biggest things he talks about, meritocracy. How a kid who's smart, if you give him all this stuff and you put him in school, and you, not because of his merit, but because of the color of his skin, they won't appreciate it nearly as much. And that's what Thomas Sowell said about affirmative action.
There, and let's also say that they also are African American, and that ought to be a factor in choosing from that pool. Maybe that's one of the considerations. Because diversity of a student body is a healthy factor.
I'm fascinated with the extent to which words, we're conditioned to react like Pavlov's dog to words. I hear diversity. Someone was asking.
That'll make me look bad.
Someone who was a trustee of a college would say that they were going to pick a new college professor. I said, what we should do is have a stopwatch there and just count how long it is till each of the contestants says the word diversity. And the guy who says it, he's 35 minutes into the interview, and the other guy who says it, the first sentence, the guy who takes 35 minutes, he should be the top of the list. The guy who says the first sentence should get the final. Because
what's wrong with diversity? I don't get the point.
My point is that this is a word that has become magic. What does it mean, if anything?
Sorry about the bad quality on that, but the ending line I think is the one you need to know. What does that word diversity, what does it even mean? What does it even mean? So Sowell taught at Douglas College. He taught at a women's college. He accepted a post at Howard University. And he said the common run of students at Howard was almost unbelievably lazy, dishonest, and rude. He wanted to go where black students were. So he went to Cornell University to teach up in New York. He challenged students. That was how he believed in teaching, making things tough. He refused to cancel classes. He didn't grade on the curve. He discovered when he got there he was the only black member on campus. He felt like he was just being hired as a token black. And as he studied for his PhD, he detested the fact that black professors were expected to be racial gurus who participated in politics. Sowell grew suspicious about colleges, and he said, rather than wanting more blacks matriculating on campus, his thinking they're setting up black studies departments as a payoff to prevent campus disruption. Sowell said, black people must be able to provide for themselves, cure themselves, defend themselves against injustices. Instead, too many of these programs steer black students into fake disciplines. He said, I sometimes wonder if those of us who are black ought to not consider declaring some sort of moral amnesty for guilty whites. We are all so guilty. Just so that they won't keep on saying and doing damn fool things that create more problems. His policies, the way he looks at the world is so simple. At Cornell, black students who would have been excelling at most colleges were turned into failures, all in the name of diversity. Sowell wrote, this is a great quote, what sort of grotesque situation have we talked ourselves into when promising pre-med students are passed over in favor of high-risk students? Sowell resigned from Cornell. He had no patience for the whole thing. Instead, he tried to do the right thing. He wrote over 45 books. He once returned a book advance rather than changing the manuscript. He had sent a piece to the New York Times. They asked him to make a couple changes. He said, no, I won't do it. Just put it in the envelope and send it back to me. He had a tough relationship with editors. Thomas Sowell was truly his own man. So he wrote a lot of books. He wrote some economics books. He published a book on Marxism in 1985, and he published an autobiography, Myths and Tragedies, in 1971. He was visiting a college in Wabash. Do I have any fellow Hoosiers in this room? Sorry. Anything? Okay, thanks. And Sowell had met this guy named Benjamin Rogie, a professor of economics. And Sowell wrote, my gosh, I was flabbergasted at the fundamental idea that you could apply economics to racial issues. That was an inspiration. Because of that, he wrote his famous book, Race and Economics, in January 1975. That book had a significant impact on a young attorney in the Midwest by the name of Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas said, the absence of dissenting black voices in discussions of race in America was so complete that I found it hard at times not to doubt my own convictions, not to doubt that I was wrong about everything. Could you imagine being out on an island like this guy was? Nobody saying anything like this, him thinking this, but not being backed up by anybody. He just must have felt like at times he was going nuts. When I read the book from Thomas Sowell, Race and Economics, I felt like a thirsty man gulping down a glass of cool water. Never before had I seen my views stated with such a crisp, unapologetic clarity about the problems faced by blacks. You wonder about the strength of Clarence Thomas, where it came from. Where it came from was Thomas Sowell. Brown versus Board of Education passed in 1954 saying segregation of public schools is unconstitutional. What was fundamental to Sowell was that he was bothered by the fact that there was so little interest in black scholars about setting up hard schools and trying to replicate them. The example he uses a lot is a school called Dunbar High School, which is located blocks away from the Supreme Court building. On the Supreme Court in 1954, when the Supreme Court ruled in 1954 that racially segregated schools were unconstitutional, Sowell was alone in expressing skepticism. He said, I saw the obstacles to the advancement of blacks as involving more than just discrimination by whites. Sowell had a lot to say about education.
What do you do to help those blacks who are still in a very low economic condition in terms of education, for example? How there are, as you said, many blacks today who are still being given totally inadequate education, cannot be expected to get very far for that reason. What would be your remedy for that?
That's very easy. I would allow their parents to have a choice of where to send them to school, whether that choice is called a voucher scheme, open enrollment, tuition tax credit, any kind of scheme of that sort. They would put that power in the hands of their parents. Mainly because that would mean that the schools would have to be responsive to them. As it is now, the school is a monopoly. They need not be responsive. I have relatives right here in New York whom I had to intervene for because the schools would not even treat them decently, much less give them access to the information they wanted that they were entitled to under the law.
If you put it in the hands of the parents, and the parents are themselves uneducated and not really aware of what the various potentials are, what makes you think that they would decide more intelligently than the present system?
I think, again, in history, as blacks emerged from slavery, and minute percentage could read or write, and yet in half a century, over half the black population was literate. Economic historians call that one of the most remarkable things in history. If you look back to the era prior to the Civil War, when there were free blacks about 500,000 in the United States, they not only were not allowed in the public schools, they were in some states forbidden even to send their children to private schools and had to do so clandestinely. And yet the census of 1850 showed that most free blacks could read and write. So I don't think that the fact that people have little education means they are anyway poorer judges than distant bureaucrats who have their own access to grind and run the public school system.
But you yourself said that you thought one of the reasons why blacks were still in an underprivileged position, those who still are, was because they had not been given a proper education.
Yes.
And we are now talking about people who had not been given a proper education, making decisions for their children as to what is a proper education. And you're saying that if that was put up to them, they would make a wiser choice than the present efforts to integrate the schools.
Let me say that if they would not make a very different choice, it would be hard to understand the hysterical opposition of teachers' unions to giving them that opportunity.
I think I heard the right date that in the 1850s, most black children could read and write. Could you imagine the arrogance of people, I have to say us, where we would think that the public bureaucracy could do a better job at educating our children over ourselves? It's such a high level of arrogance, and it's happened in so many other areas, from transgenderism all the way down. This is Sowell's conclusion on education. If you want to know what he thinks, tough schools. You got to have tough schools. Metrics to judge performance. You got to test people. You got to baseline them somehow, know what they're doing. You do away with the test, you've done away with everything. Parents and the family units make the best decisions. It's common sense, right? Common sense. Parents must show responsibility for their children. In a nutshell, that's what he says. He says, black leaders have a preconceived agenda, and that they are opposed to anything that retards that agenda. That agenda includes integration, busing, and first-rate black schools. In 1964, a psychologist at the University of Berkeley published an article saying that blacks had lower IQs than whites. Sowell proved that argument was totally wrong. He said, I've always believed the facts were so fundamental that whenever you want to go literally and figuratively, you can only get there from where you are. Sowell's testing showed that that groups rose, so when they rose socially and economically, their IQs rose. There were calls to eliminate the IQ test. Sowell rejected that idea. We have to know where people are. Objective tests at least put some limits on bias. For decades, Sowell saw the country bounding in the direction of social justice. He said the reach of national political power in every nook and cranny has proceeded in step with campaigns for greater social justice. A parent who's forced to send their child off to a public school when they are abused or terrorized by other children is painfully aware of this loss of freedom. Freedom is not simply the right of intellectuals to circulate their merchandise. It is above all the right of ordinary people to find elbow room for themselves, to live, a refuge from the rampaging presumptions of their betters. Here Sowell talks about how wealth is created under freedom.
How is wealth created? And why does the United States have the highest per capita GDP of any major country?
Wow. How many years do I have for these discussions?
It's television. You've got about 90 seconds at the most.
Oh, I guess wealth is created when the circumstances are such that people who know how to create it are free to do so. One of the things that pains me in the current crisis is people saying that Congress really needs to do something to make the economy recover. No, they need to let the economy recover. That the economy did not get to be the biggest in the world by politicians doing things. All the millions of other people whose names we don't even know, those are the people who made it the biggest economy in the world. And if politicians will get out of their way, we can and let the economy recover. They can do that.
Pretty simple steps, isn't it? Get government out of the way. Let the people do their thing. Sowell's reputation as a debater became more and more formidable. He appeared on Meet the Depressed. Oh, I'm sorry. I can't believe that guy Chuck Todd has been around for 9 years. I mean, how could you keep somebody like that around for that long? But I think you remember the good years of Marvin Kalb and Bill Monroe and my favorite guy, Tim Russert. But Sowell said, as I look at affirmative action, I don't see blacks or Hispanics rising relative to the general population under affirmative action. I have a lot more confidence in what black people can do if given the opportunity that some of the people seem to have. They think that black people must either be led by the hand or handed something directly by government. That's what he said on Meet the Press. In 1980, Sowell appeared on Milton Friedman's show, Free to Choose, and he talked about poverty. He said, if government chooses to subsidize poverty, it follows that the ranks of the poor would increase, supply and demand. What the welfare system and other kinds of government programs are doing is paying people to fail. Later on William Buckley's fire line, he said, I haven't been able to find a single country in the world where the politics being advocated for blacks in the United States have ever helped lift people out of poverty. Equal pay for men and women. Sowell had firm ideas on the subject of equal pay for men and women. Here he is on the show firing line.
I would agree with that, but you would also have to agree that generally speaking, women are paid less, for example, for the same jobs as men.
No, I would not. I would not agree with that. If you're talking about women with the same number of years of experience, with the same continuous service, etc., then when I look at that, I don't find that disparity. I find, for example, in many cases, the women are making more, depending on how you break the data down. The difference with women is between married women and everybody else. That's the real difference.
That's quite a hairdo she has. Anybody know what her name is? I don't. I could never really find out for sure. On discrimination, he argued that internal cultures played a bigger role in how groups fared than did the way they were treated by outsiders. He said, people often say that I'm denying that there's racism. On the contrary, racism exists everywhere around the world down in history. That's one of the reasons it's hard for us to use it as an empirical explanation for anything. This is the interesting part. In the United States, for example, Puerto Ricans have lower income than blacks. I don't know of anyone that believes Puerto Ricans encounter more discrimination than blacks. Obviously, there must be something other than discrimination. On the traditional family, Sowell has always defended the traditional family. My criticism of welfare state is that it stems from my understanding that families, not outside third parties, not government, not society, have been the essential decision-making units down through history and are best positioned to socialize the next generation. Anybody listen? Is anybody in this class kind of a Ben Shapiro fan at all? I mean, isn't this exactly what he's been talking about the last 3 days, almost word for word? On equity and trying to create equal outcomes between blacks, just like everything else, it's simple. If blacks and whites in the United States were the same, they would be the only two groups on the planet that are the same. On gun control, Sowell looks at comparisons between the United States and the United Kingdom. The standard argument, you hear it all the time, oh my goodness, the UK is so great, it has very few guns, lots of gun control, very few murders. Whereas the United States has lots of guns, relative limited gun control, and many murders. Therefore, guns are responsible for it. But Sowell argues that even when the UK had very little gun control and many more guns, there were also very few murders there. He is a master, Thomas Sowell, at casual reasoning. Here's what he says about healthcare.
Let me give you a quotation and a fact. The quotation comes from you in Basic Economics. Quote, a long-standing staple of political rhetoric has been the attempt to keep the prices of medical care reasonable or affordable, yet the amount of resources required to supply the things we want are wholly independent of what we are willing to pay. It is completely unreasonable to expect reasonable prices. That's the quotation. Here's the fact. The United States devotes 17% of its GDP to healthcare. The next country down in that is Switzerland at about 11% of its GDP. So we devote something like 50% more than the next country down. Now, surely it's not unreasonable to suggest that we're just spending too much.
The question is, when people are spending their own money, I don't know how third parties can say it's too much. Well, ironically, Rahm Emanuel's brother, who's a doctor, had on board for this whole Obamacare thing. But really, he revealed why Americans spend more. Americans don't, when they go to a hospital, they're in private or semi-private rooms more often than in countries on government health care. And so instead of being in a ward, you're in your own private or semi-private room. It costs more. American doctors are more readily available. There is less waiting time. Some people prefer to pay in money and others in waiting time. Now, when you have a painful disease and the government tells you there's a 6-month waiting list, that you're paying in a different way. It doesn't show up in the statistics. But you may not even live the 6 months, depending on what you have.
So we pay more and get more.
That's it.
We pay more, we get more, we don't have to wait in line. We have a better product. When my mother-in-law goes in the hospital over the weekend, she gets a private room. It takes Social Security 5 days in the hospital to do her paperwork to get her home to replace at who knows how much, $10,000 a day. Isn't that about what a hospital room costs now? Christopher DeMuth, who was from the American Enterprise think tank, says about Sowell, Thomas Sowell may be the only black person who's really been a victim of racial discrimination. If he wasn't black, people would realize what a great economist he is. On civil rights, Sowell has never denied that racism exists, but he showed that facts and evidence and the number of blacks in professional, technical, and high-level occupations had more than doubled in the decade preceding the Civil Rights Act. In other occupations, gains by blacks were greater during the 40s, and in various skilled trade, the income of blacks relative to whites more than doubled between 1936 and 59. So isn't arguing for a return to Jim Crow, or as we know, isn't called Jim Crow 2.02, but rather argued that people who argued the black middle class success was due to civil rights did not have the facts on their side. Sowell is so interesting. He talks about, even with the election of a black president, Obama, the culmination of civil rights strategy did not produce the black advancement that was promised. Black leaders and their sympathizers on the progressive left remain as wedded to the notion that past and present racial discrimination are the biggest barriers to black progress. Sowell says liberals continue to defend group preferences but have yet to explain. Please explain why something that happened 40 years ago justifies discrimination against some guy who is 39. On people like this grifter, Ibram X. Kendi, and one of his fellow professors, Tanisha Coles, this is what he says about them. For many, discrimination and racism are not partial truths, but whole truths. Not just things to oppose, but explanations to cling to, like a security blanket. On George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, I think this Wall Street Journal article, if you want to write something down, the 2019 article that lays out the facts on how many black people were actually shot, Sowell said that it showed absolutely no evidence of racial bias in police shootings, and that's documented. In fact, the data showed black and Hispanic suspects were less likely than white suspects to be shot by the police. Sowell says groups like Black Lives Matter remain far more interested in white behavior. They're far more interested in white behavior than they are in black behavior. Here Sowell talks about the importance of culture.
Are you saying that in a culturally pluralistic society such as America, are you saying that the variable in success or lack of success is the culture of the particular group?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. And I'm saying it not only for the United States, but in terms of the studies of various other countries around the world, the same thing seems to be true. You not only find the same group having the same characteristics in country after country. As the Germans produced the first pianos in Australia, they created the piano industry in the United States, they built the first pianos in England, they built the first pianos in Russia. You look at the Chinese, what they major in in college is what they major in the United States in college.
Namely science
and technology, heavily. And this follows the group around the world. So the notion that the group is a creature of society, that society is shaped in the group, just will not stand up to the facts.
Did you say that
won't stand up to the facts? Sowell's been frequently criticized. And he said there's seldom a shortage of people willing to draw up blueprints for salvation. Sowell's message to make his readers smarter, that's us, is not to tell them what to do. On hiring and quotas, racial quotas started as efforts to ensure equal opportunity, but these quotas have evolved and they were supposed to be temporary. He says preference policies have been used to create a false sense of dependency. insofar as underrepresented groups are led to believe that special treatment is necessary. In some cases now, blacks who have largely lifted themselves out of poverty look like people who owe their rise to affirmative action or government or civil rights. On reparations, I think that one thing I want you to read right here is that would anybody advocate that today's Jews are morally entitled to put today's Germans in concentration camps in compensation for the Nazi Holocaust? The reparation argument is just ridiculous. Group compensation for slavery is plausible. I love this. Group compensation for slavery is plausible, but only if guilt can be inherited. He says reparations are a gross immortality and they in no way compensate. Sowell has had so many critics that don't want to hear the message I'm sharing with you tonight. And what they eventually did was just start to ignore him. They accuse him of being of racial betrayal. His arguments don't stand up. Black contrarians are often vilified. You're going to hear one more clip from the late great Walter Williams. Walter Williams was treated the same way. Groupthink does not always lead to wiser decisions than what emerges from a clash of differing ideas. Sowell's idea is when people say blacks need to stick together politically, all blacks need to vote Democratic, we've got to stick together. Here's what Sowell said. If thinking in lockstep works, show me the evidence. I imagine that the Pony Express reacted that way to Western Union's methods. No horses, please. I'm often amazed for someone who writes about so many controversial issues, not just raise how little criticism I get, at least tell me I'm wrong, you know? Sowell's black conservatism is less straightforward. And Sowell's idea of black conservatives is someone that is not interested in maintaining the status quo. And that status quo includes welfare, bad schools, quotas, separatism, a return to the Jim Crow era. Walter Williams falls in that camp. He was Sowell's friend for 50 years. And Williams also suggested that racism in and of itself is an insufficient explanation for racial disparities. Walter Williams said, black activists such as Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton and black intellectuals benefit immensely from making white people feel guilty. Tom Sowell does not benefit from making white people feel guilty. Here's another story from Walter Williams about black conservatism.
There is some sort of growing conservative movement.
Well, there was a time when that community consisted of me and Walter Williams. I know Walter used to say, with the two of us should never fly on the same plane, otherwise the whole plane will disappear. The plane goes down.
I don't know if you could hear that or not, but Walter Williams used to say we both can't fly on the same airplane because if it crashed, black conservatism would disappear. Funny. On naysayers of his own race, 83% of black respondents who knew about school vouchers said they were in favor of such programs. Then why does it take Ohio? I don't know where Kentucky's at on the school choice issue. Was there something just in the news about that? Can anybody share that?
We're not there.
I just can't understand why 40 years later, the politicians can't actually just do the right thing. It's just such an easy call. The old elite is very good at playing on media conceptions, especially when they run out of substantive agreements. On Black Lives Matter, the sins of others are fascinating to human beings, but they are not always the best way to self-development or self-advancement. The moral regeneration of white people might be an interesting project, but I am not sure we have quite that much time to spare. Those who have fought on this front are very much like the generals who like to refight the lost war instead of preparing for the next struggle. On blacks in politics, legal scholars like Kimberly Williams Crenshaw assert that the black community must develop and maintain a distinct political consciousness. For Crenshaw and like-minded others, diversity is fine so long as it's not of the intellectual variety. Blacks lifting themselves up out of poverty. Historical fact is that most blacks did lift themselves out of poverty. In 1940, 87% of black families lived below the poverty line. This is an amazing statistic. When you leave tonight, I need you to remember this statistic, that it dropped 40 points. It's the only time that poverty has ever dropped. Ever! And what did we do? We screwed it up. In the 60s, black poverty dropped to 30%. The reduction of poverty convinced many blacks that their economic progress depends on government programs. Sowell sees little evidence that embracing a racial or ethnic identity helps performing groups excel. On intellectuals and poverty, intellectuals give people who have the handicap of poverty the further handicap of a sense of victimhood. They've encouraged the poor to believe that poverty is caused by the rich, a lasting handicap to the poor. Oh, and about common decency.
Here, I want to mention one thing that you say right at the end of the book, that really what we need more than anything else, perhaps, is common decency.
Yes.
And we've kind of lost that.
It isn't common anymore. I mean, when I was going to school, we'd have fights on the schoolyard grounds. When one guy was clearly beaten, whoever was the toughest kid in the crowd would simply step in and stop it. And the other guys would say, "You want to fight? You can fight me." Yeah.
That's what we need in the public square.
Yes. But I mean, it's only so much the police can do. If you don't have common decency, the cops are not going to be able to handle
it. Common decency. When asked how Walter Williams wanted to be remembered, this is what he said. He said, "In retrospect, my misfortunes were in some ways fortunate, for they taught me things that would be hard to otherwise understand. I have lived through these experiences that many intellectuals can only theorize about. Lived through poverty, lived through learning how to read at a late point in life, learned through actually working for the government. On his intellectual legacy, Sowell sees his work on economics, political philosophy, or race as a part of the continuum. He wrote this in a personal letter to his good friend Walter Williams, who unfortunately passed away on December 1st, 2020. He said, "Walter, you and I were both pretty pessimistic as to whether our writing would actually make an impact. Today, at least, we know that there are lots of other blacks writing and saying similar things, more than I can keep track of. And many of them are sufficiently younger than we know, and we know there will be good people carrying on the fight after we are gone." That was Thomas Sowell. Did he show you the evidence? What, thumbs up, thumbs down? Thank you very much for listening to me tonight. Any questions or anything? Any questions or thoughts on anything that you saw that you? Yeah, yes, sir.
He didn't pass the weekend, has he?
Thomas Sowell is still alive. I believe he's 91.
Okay, all right.
Is anybody willing to take on one of his policies that he talked about and tell me how you feel about it real quick? Come on now. It's hard to refute much of what he says, isn't it? It's been great coming back, and I'm going to lobby Jan to let me come back a 5th time somewhere down the line. Thank you very much.
You know, something I haven't done in a while, and I really need to, is we need to recognize that there's several elected officials here, and I just want to recognize a few. Let me start off. I'll start with Marianne, State Representative Marianne Proctor. Boone County Commissioner Kathy Flagg. And I can't find her. City Councilwoman Janine, yeah. Is there anyone else I missed? Great. Well, we still have one more person that's going to speak. Sean Bowles.
Hi.
Is Sean here? Yeah.
Come up with me, buddy. Don't worry, this won't take long. Jan, can you help me out? I got a 52 slide presentation. We're gonna turn the lights down. And then we'll cue up the Kenny G.
Yeah, they'll kill me.
No? Okay. Hi, Sean Bowles. This is my son, John Anthony. We're part-time attenders. My wife has a better attendance record with these meetings. But today, all I want to do is just bring an awareness to a youth organization that I'm sure many of you may not have heard of. Have any of you heard of Trail Life USA? Handful of folks. That's great. Good. Okay. So, for many years, the Boy Scouts were a preeminent organization. Okay, and then what happened a few years ago? Their compass lost its way a little bit, right? So they had some policy changes when they would let anybody, or let's just say certain demographics, become leaders. They had also changed policy to where girls can enter it. Well, approximately actually 10 years ago, this month, the end of this month, 50 men, Christian leaders of various organizations, they pretty much had enough of it, and they came together, and they actually met in Louisville, Kentucky. And what came out of it was a Christ-centered organization called Trail Life USA. I gotta read some of my notes, because sometimes I need notes to make sure I put my socks on before my shoes. So, don't mind this. Okay, so, yeah. So they were getting kind of disenfranchised with what was going on with Boy Scouts. They decided they needed to come up with a solution to it. So Trail Life USA was what came out of it. Trail Life USA is a church-based, Christ-centered, boy-focused mentoring and discipleship journey that speaks to the heart of a boy, and established on timeless values derived from the Bible and set in the context of outdoor adventures. Boys from kindergarten through 12th grade are engaged in a troop setting by male mentors, where they are challenged to grow in character, understand their purpose, serve their community, and develop practical leadership skills to carry out the mission for which they were created. I am an adult leader in a local troop. Our troop is chartered by Good Shepherd Lutheran off of a greatly named street called, anyone want to guess it? Gunpowder. Wally likes that one, don't you? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. All right, so we're there. We're not members of that church. You don't have to be a member of that church. It's just the church is a chartering body to help start that troop. We're an extension of their, I guess you could say, ministry. All right. So the vision of Trail Life USA is to be the premier national chartered character. Sorry, I got Invisaligns. I got pronunciation disorder and irritable bowel syndrome too. National Character Development Organization for young men, which produces godly and responsible husbands, fathers, and citizens. Their mission is to guide generations of courageous young men to honor God, lead with integrity, serve others, and experience outdoor adventure. Their motto is walk worthy, and that comes from Colossians 1:10, that you walk worthy in the Lord, fully pleasing Him, being fruitful in every good work, increasing in the knowledge of God. And the oath is on my honor. I will do my best to serve God and my country, to respect authority and be a good steward of creation, to treat others as I want to be treated. Our troop is called KY0316, and the 316 is actually Deuteronomy 31:6, which is, be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid nor fear them, for the Lord your God, He is the one that goes with you. He will not forsake you nor leave you. So each troop may have that. Now, I'm not going to pick on my son. I mean, I didn't want to, we kind of finagled him to come out here, and he's being a good trooper. So you got a breakdown of like the age groups. I'll just give a little basic rundown of that. Okay, the younger kids, about 5 to 10 years old, they're in what's called woodland trails, and they basically learn some basic knowledge about outdoor skills, citizenship, character, friendship, and faith through the activities, awards, and instructions. The navigators, which are junior high boys, They gain an understanding of their values, beliefs, and then under the guidance of godly male role models through being responsible in outdoor adventure in their home and school life. And they explore different areas of interest in earning their trail badges, so for the adventures. And speaking of which, right here on his, here if you want to just get that out of there. These top green badges, they're all the ones that are typically won by, awarded by navigators. However, high school boys can earn them too, and I'll give a rundown of like, you got Fire Ranger Outdoor Cooking, Our Flag, what was that? Trail Skills, Camping, Wood Tools, Aquatics. It's great about aquatics. You can throw him in a pool fully clothed, and he can remove his clothes and turn them into flotation devices. First aid, rope work. I'll get down to those in a moment. But as they're going through each of these, the badge work, there's specific pieces of scripture that ties in with that, and we have open discussions about what that actually means and how where do you find this in the Bible, and have open discussion about it. Plus, they have to do some particular activities and proof that they've earned, know these particular skills. We always have great discussion. The adventurers, they're the high school age boys, and they're the pool from which our, I guess you could say, the troop leadership comes from. So boys will actually be the first officer, the second officer, and the quartermaster, and many of them would be the patrol leaders. He's actually a patrol leader. And then you can earn additional badges, which he has right now. He has citizenship, fitness, you get 1 of 4, emergency preparedness. Help me out with the other 3.
There is personal resources, family man, and outdoor life.
Outdoor life, that is correct. Going on beyond that is slightly, back here he has a service star for 20 hours of community service there. And all these wooden medallion type things are electives. So earn those, and that's basically you can find something among their interests, and they can achieve that. But what I was trying to get at here is just, I know a lot of folks will say, hey, are you a Boy Scout, or where the case may be? No, Trail Life USA, and Trail Life USA has only been around for 10 years, so it may not have all that bit of traction, but just recently they've achieved we now have 1,000 troops. So it keeps on progressing and so forth like that. And I feel it's a great opportunity, since many boys, I guess, young men are being under attack. You don't have anything under attack, or I guess emasculated. I use that term. So this was an organization that we felt convicted in participating in, and a lot of the adult leaders like myself, we are fathers, and of boys are there, just naturally for a parent to want to be engaged and be involved with what their child does, and we want to, like many of the other fathers, have something that can bring to the table to help out with in the efforts here. And eventually these adventures, they're the ones that the little guys are to look up to. We're just a brand new troop, so hopefully the younger kids will be able to look up and seeing how these older guys are progressing in such a short time, and they're doing all the exciting things that they want to do. One of the things that I do in addition to this is I'll host I'll facilitate an annual shooting sports event, since I'm a certified shooting sports instructor with 4-H, and I'm a certified RSO with NRA. That will just get the older boys, and we'll have a shooting sports orientation kind of thing. So I do have some information if you're interested. I have a few brochures, I have a few handouts, and I do have an example of when I'm referring to the Christian worldview infused with the badge work. I do have an example of what that looks like. So if anyone's interested, they can check that out. happen to have any questions, maybe I can go in the back of the room with my good trooper here and we can answer questions. Yes, Lord.
Are you trying to, and Daniel Beard, chartered, scouting here in Newport. That's where the original scout work began. Are you trying to charter yourself as an organization like this? Because I think this is a great idea.
Well, Trail Life USA is already established.
Okay.
And we're already, and there's troops throughout the greater Cincinnati area. In Northern Kentucky, I'm familiar with at least a couple. A new troop just got themselves set up down the road. Okay. But our national headquarters is in South Carolina. I'm not the big man, the totem pole when it comes to our troop. I am what you call, I'm over the high school boys. I'm what's called an advisor. I think I do have I do hold a seat on the board in some capacity or something of that nature. Like, I can't remember if I'm quartermaster or also I'm part-time quartermaster for the troop, but I'm part-time chaplain. That sort of thing. I'm helping, that sort of thing. But we are fully chartered, and there's more information about, like, if someone wanted to start their own troop, the Trail Life USA has that information mapped out so that you know where to go and so forth like that. Typically it gets established by the charter. Yes, sir.
Is there an equivalent to your group for young women?
Thank you. Great question. We were not blessed with a daughter. We just blessed with a son with 2 first names. There is a sister organization called American Heritage Girls. Okay. Everyone heard about them, right? I always hear about the girl stuff, but never about the boys. Always girl. But anyway, yeah, they actually are chartered by the same church that our troop is. So we have a sister troop, that sort of thing. But this is unapologetically Christian, unapologetically boys. The other one's unapologetically Christian, unapologetically girls. And we hold fast to that, and we're not going to make any bones about it. Not gonna compromise. And I just want to close out the meeting with a couple reminders. First of all, John is going to be performing at Italian Fest Saturday?
No, Thursday.
Thursday.
Tomorrow night.
Oh, tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. And if someone heard that he does a bang-up job of my old Kentucky own. And also want to remind you of our next meeting, and that is July 5th, so the day after 4th of July. It's a Wednesday, 6 o'clock. It's going to be at the Erlanger Library, and our speaker is going to be Harold Ziegler. I don't know, probably a lot of people have heard about Harold. He's been involved with the Tea Party movement from the very beginning. He was raised a communist in East Kentucky. East Germany. Yeah, Kentucky and Germany. Yeah. Can you tell me what book? What's the name of his book that he authored?
It's on Amazon, and I can't remember. It's in the Blessed. I can't remember the name of it.
I can't remember either. But he's not allowed to sell copies of his book at the library. But he'll be signing it. If you go on Amazon and get his book and bring it to the meeting, he'll sign it at the meeting. So hope to see you all on July 5th, and you all have a wonderful 4th of July. And also, we always need help with putting the chairs away too.